Whenever you're building a .NET application, it is extremely likely that you're going to have to deal with connection strings, access tokens, and a bunch of sensitive data. Now, this leads us on to the bigger question. How do you actually manage secret data? Now, obviously, we don't want to just add it in source control because that's really insecure. So what's the best secret management strategy for your solution? Now, in this video, you're going to learn all the different ways that you can handle secrets in .NET. We're going to have a bit of theory, a bit of practical stuff. It's going to be very interesting, so stick around to the end to find out the best way to architect your application. The first way that you can manage sensitive data within your .NET applications is good old app settings. Now, there's nothing really too clever here. This is definitely going to be the easiest technique to use. However, it's also definitely the least secure. I've quickly jumped us over to Visual Studio and we'll look at how we can manage secrets just using normal app settings. Now, regardless if you've created a website or a console app, you're going to get an app settings.json. And then within this file, you're going to add in any setting required by your application to function. There are two big issues with storing sensitive data in your app settings. First off, you'll be storing your data in plain text, meaning anyone who can access that file locally can read your sensitive data. Secondly, your app settings will be checked into source control, which means that anyone who has access to your source control can also read that data. Now, regardless if you need to manage normal or sensitive data, your application will also likely be running on different environments like local, staging, and prod. This means you'll need to deal with environment-specific sensitive data. And adding all that data into a single file would be a bad idea for many reasons. This is why it's recommended for you to create environment-specific config files. Now, an environment-specific config file will make it easier for you to manage data. It also means that you can use your git ignore to ensure your sensitive data is not committed into source control, which is a better approach. Now, out of the box, your .NET application is not going to know how to read in additional config files when you create them. And this is why you'll need to add some code into your program.cs in order to read these different files. Now, when any .NET Core app is running, the first thing we need to do is configure it, and we do this with the create default builder. Now, in order to define the rules for how the app settings.config files are loaded, we can use this configure.application. And you can see here, I've got a bunch of code which defines how those files are read in. Now, the first thing I do is read in the default app settings.json, and this false thing here means it's mandatory. So this means that if this file doesn't exist, my application is going to blow up. Next up, I want to read in environment specific settings. So you can see here that I'm using an environment variable, ASP.NET Core _environment. So this is going to read in an environment variable, which is basically going to map to this thing right here. So if I look back in my Solution Explorer, you can see that I've got a debug version here. And in order to do this in code, you can do a builder add JSON app settings dot, then we paste in my environment variable and we've got .json. Now at the end you can see that this says true. This means that this call is optional, so if any of these files don't exist, no big worries, carry on as normal. Now above this you can see that I'm also trying to read in files by the environment.machine name. And if I go back to my Solution Explorer, you can see that this is mapping to this one here because this is my machine name. After we do all of this great stuff, you can see that I'm doing add environment variables. And in this way, you can see that we've read in multiple different types of settings. Now, the key when using sensitive data is to make sure that these different application settings.json files don't get committed into source control. So this is where our git ignore comes in. So clicking on our git ignore, we want to make sure that we exclude all of these files. The final step in this process is that obviously if you're not committing your values into source code, you're still going to need to set them on your remote servers. And you do this using environment variables. And let's quickly see how we can set this locally for completeness. So if I go to edit my environment variables, I can click on this button here, and then within my user variables here, you can see that I've added my key and the value that I want to override. Now again, this is stored in plain text, But what we can do is, after creating this variable, if I reset Visual Studio and launch it, because Visual Studio does have a cache around environment variables, you'll see that when I'm running my code this time, within this value, I'm getting override rather than my secret. And that's how we do everything end to end. The next way you can deal with sensitive data is to use the Secret Manager tool that comes with the .NET CLI. Now, this tool, if you weren't aware, is really handy for managing secrets locally, and it means that you're not going to accidentally commit your sensitive data into source control. So let's see how we can get this up and working. To get going with the Secret Manager, you first need to enable it. Now, you can do this either via the CLI, and we'll look at the commands in a second, or via Visual Studio. So if I right click on any project, you can see here that we've got this Manage User Secrets, this option here. So if I select this, what's going to happen is that a JSON file is going to get created. Now, if you're more of a coding purist and you prefer to use the CLI, you can do the equivalent from the terminal by doing .NET user secrets and then init, and this is going to generate that file for you. Now, regardless of the approach you use to enable Secret Manager, you can check it worked correctly by opening up your project's CS.proj file, and then within the property group, you should see this user secrets with some sort of random GUID. And if you see this, it means it's up and running okay. So one really important thing to understand about the Secret Manager is it's going to store all your secrets outside of your solution folder, and it's actually going to store them on your PC. Now, you can find your secrets by going to your user account, then app data, roaming, Microsoft, and then user secrets. Now within here, you can see that we've got this folder and it's got a bunch of GUIDs. And then within here, we're going to find a secrets.json file. And after opening this file, you're going to see a bunch of JSON that contains all your values and secrets. Now, obviously, you're free to manually update this file when you want to add or edit secrets. However, you can also use the CLI. To add in a secret, again, you do .NET user-secrets. Then we use the set command. We add in a key, and then we add in a secret. Boom. So another point that you should be aware of is that the Secret Manager doesn't use encryption to store sensitive data. Now, if we look within my JSON file, you can see that my value here, my secret, it's plain text, anyone can read it. Now, obviously, the good thing is that because this file is stored outside of your solution, no one's going to accidentally commit it into GitHub. However, if someone could access your PC, they could see the secret. Now, I'm guessing for most people, no one's going to care about this, but potentially if you're SOC 2 or ISO 76593742376, whatever the number is, ISO 123, I don't know. But this could be something to consider. Now, assuming you don't care about plain text, the next question you might have is, how do I access my secrets in code? Well, the good news is that the code you need to write is exactly the same code that you need to write to access any app setting. So you probably know it all already. Now, I've jumped over to my program.cs, and the important thing is that in web application.createbuilder, remember all .NET apps need to call this, all your secrets are going to be loaded in. Now, in order to access a setting, just like anything else, it's going to be loaded into the configuration object. So remember, in my JSON, I created a key, which was my key, and the value is my secret. So I can access it by doing configuration, adding in my key here, and then in this sensitive data, you probably can't see because it's so small, but you can see that the value, my secret, is being returned. And I think a final thing which is worth calling out is that secrets.json is a JSON file, and it will allow you to nest objects. So you can see here I've got start, child, and a value which is in nested. Now, if I go back to my code, you can see I can access that value by using the colon here. So I've got start, colon, child, colon, nested. And you can see here that I'm getting the value which has been added. Now, personally, I think Secret Manager is a great tool for local development use. However, it definitely falls down in production. Now, the reason for this is obviously it's storing all the values as plain text in config. This means that when you're hooking up your production environment, you're going to have all of your sensitive data contained within a config file that anyone can read if they get access to your server. And the bigger question, I guess, here is, if you can do that, why don't you just add it in an app settings in the first place? So to recap, the .NET Secret Manager is cool for local development. However, it's not really going to cut the mustard for production. And this is where Cloud Secret Managers come into play. The first thing to point out is that the majority of cloud providers have their own custom online cloud secret manager. So as you can see from the screen, AWS has AWS Secrets Manager, Google Cloud has Secret Manager, Netlify has just released Secrets Controller, and for a final example, we can't forget Azure's Key Vault. Now, obviously within this video, I can't review every single online cloud secret manager, but just so you get a gist of how things work, I've logged into a dummy Azure Key Vault that I created. Now, once you log into Azure, you can define things like access policies, so you can find who has access to create secrets, read secrets, all of that kind of good stuff. Now, underneath here, you can see we've got secrets and keys. And if I quickly run you through the generate new secret script, you'll hopefully see where you get a lot more control. So with a secret, you can give it a name and a value, and the value will be hashed and encrypted. Also, you can define activation dates and expiration dates. You can either just say if the feature's enabled or not. Right, now, out of the options discussed thus far, implementing a cloud secret manager is definitely the most secure. Passwords are never stored in plain text, so no one can look in source control or log onto your hosting provider and check out the files and access your sensitive data. Now, with a cloud provider, it's really easy to spin up different vaults. So you can have a vault for production, development, pre-production, whatever. Now, the great thing about using these off-the-shelf solutions is it's also going to manage all the access for you. This means you can define roles, permissions, you can use SSO, you can do anything you want to make sure that your secrets are secure and only the correct people can access and edit them. So that covers the benefits. Let's think about some of the side effects. Now, the first thing to consider is complexity. Adding a cloud provider into the mix is going to make things more complicated. First, you need to make sure you know how to use it. This means you're going to have to master Azure, GCP, and the provider itself. Now, the second thing you need to consider is that if your secret manager goes down, your whole application will break, development will probably break, and you'll come to a grinding halt. This is why that when you use a cloud provider, making sure it's always available and that there's a disaster recovery plan is essential. Now, the second thing to consider is cost. Now, the cost for running a cloud provider is probably not going to be your biggest expense. However, it is going to add in a recurring monthly cost into your services. Now, the third thing, again, this is a very niche case, is that you always need to be connected to your secret manager in order to do development work. Now, this has happened to me a few times over the years. If you need to go home, you're working on a train, you've got rubbish Wi-Fi, you won't be able to work locally without your connection because you'll be blocked. The final type of secret management to consider is to actually store your config within your application. Now, if you're using a custom database or you're using a CMS, storing your secrets within your CMS can be a great idea. Now, this is my website. You can see here that I've got a settings page, which I've created myself. In here, I've got some level of sensitive data. Now, if you can get away with using an existing database or even better, a CMS, in my opinion, then you're going to get a bunch of wins. I mean, you've got minimum setup because you've got access to everything already. You've got no additional pricing because you're paying for everything already. If you're using your CMS, all the logging in, users, restrictions, all that kind of stuff comes out the box, so you don't need to worry about it. If you are using a database, you're not storing values as plain text in config, so it's secure. And finally, if you have different environments like dev, prod, staging, whatever, you can just use different databases to manage all those different settings, so you don't need to worry about configs and transforms, and in general, your CI/CD process will be a little bit easier to set up. So, to summarize all of this, I think it's obvious there's no black and white solution for all projects. Now, personally, I think that a lot of people are unaware about the .NET secret management approach. And if you're doing local or hobby projects or working in small teams, then I think that's an essential tool that you should consider adding into your workflow if you're not already. Now, if you're doing enterprise level stuff and you're working in a big team, then definitely use a cloud secret manager because it's the most robust and secure process. Anyway, I'm hoping you've got a few nuggets of wisdom from this video. Now, before we part ways, don't forget to hit subscribe, click the like button if you found value from this video. I also do a free newsletter every Sunday on .NET related stuff. The links to everything is down below. Click a bell, do all that stuff. Now, just in case you haven't come across my channel before, I'm John and I release a video every single Sunday that will help you to become a better developer. And if you're serious about leveling up your dev game, you don't want to miss out. Now, before we part ways, if you want to learn a little bit more about .NET, then I've created a video about the best hidden features in Visual Studio 2022. I don't think you're going to want to miss out on that. Now, aside from that, hope you're having a great day wherever you are, and until next Sunday, happy coding.